Welcome back to Shift with Elena and Brendan. In this conversation, I chat with Brendan McAdams. He's a returning guest on the podcast. We recorded, I think, about a year and a half ago for the first time. And today we dove deep into the work that he's doing in sales, and he offers some practical strategies around sales, and especially for startups, especially in the healthcare field. I think sales is a skill that can be applied across board. He definitely had done a great job just really providing really useful tips for anybody in the sales. You can apply just about any industry, I think. And so I always love to have him back because he really just provides some really practical examples. So if you're, curious about getting into sales, if you're a startup, or if you're just a business person out there trying to figure out how can I bring my A game? How do I follow up with leads? How do I find those leads? And so on. This conversation is definitely for you. So check it out, subscribe, comment, and come back for more. Brendan, welcome back to the Shift podcast. It's been like a year and a half, maybe even 2 years. I need to go back and see actually when we recorded the first time. So nice to have you back.
It's good to be back, Elena. Good to be here. Thanks.
So the first time when we first connected, we talked a lot about kind of like your sales journey, and just like I remember you gave some super practical tips. So I'm going to make sure to loop this episode, our first episode, to this one for people who are listening, because I thought that you brought us some really great points. Okay. But for people who maybe haven't listened to the first one, or maybe who forgot kind of your background, give me a little bit of a snapshot of just like your career story, how you got into sales, and catch me up to the work that you're doing today, which is primarily focused on startups and entrepreneurs.
Well, so let me start by saying that one of the things I oftentimes I spend a lot of time coaching people in sales, a lot of founders and people that are technical and don't have a sales background, and one of the things I often stress with them is try not to talk about yourself too much. And so, because people just don't care. They really care about themselves. They care about what, whatever it is you're trying, whatever it is their problem is, or their objective. And so can you put it in that? So when people ask me to, my background, I try and keep it pretty short, but I'm going to indulge you and tell you a little bit about how I got started in this. And, at some level, it was my father was a doctor and just a very kind of a driven guy in a good way, and I sort of picked up some of that sales capability from him. I when I was a kid, I sold orthopedic, these belt buckles that had that orthopedic symbol in them. I sold them on mail order, and then I did, and he got me interested in doing that, and then I did some other stuff where I made barbecue pits and sold them, and so then I got into college, and then and one of the things I figured out in college is that there wasn't much. I got an English degree, and I didn't. And the thing about getting an English degree is it's not of much use unless you're going to teach. But as it turns out, salespeople need to know how to communicate and how to write and how to speak, and put words together. And I was sort of capable of doing that. And so I ultimately fell into sales because, I don't have a technical background, or at least I didn't at the time. And it was a job I could do. And so that's how I got into it. And so then I just sort of, I ended up doing some work for a research company for a while, and that helped kind of refine my thinking and my ability to present myself and create good, cogent arguments and that sort of thing. And then, as is the case with, I think, for a lot of people, there's a certain amount of luck and good fortune that comes into it. I had a cousin that was working on the East Coast, and he called me up one day and said, "Hey, there's a job. They're looking for a job for a salesperson." And this was calling on AT&T, and at the time, AT&T, the phone company, was breaking up into the various different businesses, and as part of the divestiture edict that came down from it was a kind of antitrust thing, and so I ended up going to sell into AT&T, and that's where I got to do the thing that I really wanted to do, which was to sell into large enterprises, and that's how I got the ball rolling. So that's my background, and then now fast forward, I ended up doing that for quite a while, enterprise sales in telecom and health, and then financial services, and then healthcare. And then I decided after a while, I'm going to go out and do this on my own and see if I can't just help other companies with sales. First as a kind of a contract person, sort of a hired gun, and then and by the way, there's a fair amount of demand for that. And then ultimately just to work with companies to help them with sales strategy and sales execution and coaching. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
Way to pivot your English degree, by the way. I find that so fascinating. Well, I mean, like you've tied it nicely, because you're right. Like, it's all about sales is all about communicating. It's about writing. It's about, what I'm saying, different forms of communication. So kudos to you. Flip that degree. I love it. Listen, I mean, sales. I think like I am somebody who learned sales the hard way, and I'm not by any means great at it yet. I think it's like a continuous thing, because it's like every time you sell, depending on who you're selling to, what you're selling, there's so many pieces to it. And I think it's probably one of the most important skills anyone can have, because even like whether you're working internally, right, whether you're working externally, whether you're building your own business, you're selling. You're either just selling to your colleagues or your boss or your stakeholders, or to potential clients and so on. Like, essentially, we're just negotiating and selling all the time. So it's a super skill. And I want to kind of position this way, because I think that the skill of sale can be applied anywhere. So like anybody who's listening to this, like the things that we're going to talk about, like I want to focus on the startup and entrepreneurial piece, but I think we can literally take that skill and pivot to any other thing that you might be, any other career essentially. So talk to me a little bit about, obviously, I'm building ShiftWell, and so sales is it's my job. Like I'm the salesperson in the company, and it's very hard to sell when you have no brand to back you up. Like, I'm not at AT&T selling into, like, it's much harder. Sales is hard anyway. It's much harder when you're building a brand and selling an unknown brand. So talk to me a little bit about how you work with kind of startups and entrepreneurs, and like, what's the difference between like working with internally sales and then working with people who are building small companies and so on? I'm just curious.
Well, I think, the difference between someone that's selling something, more of an idea, you're inside an organization and you're trying to get something accomplished, you're trying to get other people to rally around whatever that idea is perhaps a little lower pressure, or there's maybe a certain amount of finesse that goes with that is different from selling a product or a service to a customer, because the transaction, there's not quite the same level of transaction, but a lot of the same fundamentals apply. And that is, first of all, I think people don't want to be sold to. They want to come to the conclusion on their own. Right? They want to feel like they made the decision and the decision wasn't foisted upon them. And so there's a certain amount of nuance and kind of finesse that needs to happen in terms of making sure that you're not just bludgeoning them, so to speak, with your ideas and your kind of approach and what you want to get out of things. And so to the degree to which you can make it feel like, or make them realize that they have control over the decision they make, it makes it much easier to make the decision that you want to make anyway. So that would be one thing I'd say. Another thing I'd say that is critically important in the process of when you're selling is it's to adopt a certain level of curiosity. This isn't an easy thing to teach necessarily, and I struggle with it myself in terms of when I'm coaching people, because getting people to be curious is something that's, you can't just flip a switch. They've got it. There's a certain it has to be genuine to be quite blunt. But what I try and do is get people to think in terms of being curious about the other person rather than being focused on making the sale. And curious means understanding where they are, what their thought processes are, what's preventing them from making a decision, what's causing them to have this, whatever difficulty they're having, if they're having one, what do they want to, where they aspire to be, those sorts of things. Understanding the problem in some deep level is critically important. One of the things I find in my coaching is I spend probably as much time talking to them about mindset and having the right frame of mind and the right level of enthusiasm and empowering them. I spend as much time doing that as I do teaching process and strategy and how to close and things like that, and contracting and negotiating. A lot of the work that I do ends up being around getting them to understand that they are, they're good at this. They overcoming their own internal hesitations and limitations, and that's a big part of what I do.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate this perspective, because I think a lot of people forget that, you're right, nobody wants to be sold to, and we actually just want a conversation, and we want to partner with somebody. And as you're speaking, I'm like, I just think about, like, even just like the other day, I mean, people reach out to me on LinkedIn and try to sell me stuff, and I'm like, and they're selling, and obviously it's like an automated email, like automated, template or whatever, which is fine. Like it is what it is. Like I've done it before. I'll be honest. I've sent that automated email on LinkedIn through a CRM before. I then moved away from it because I don't think it's the best strategy. But so I get it. I've made that mistake as well. But it's such an it's not personal at all. And like it was very clear, and like through some of the messages, I mean, I get these like weekly, if not daily, and it's very clear that they have no idea my pain point. I'm not their audience. They don't know what they'll choose, like one key word from my profile and try to sell me when that's like the least of my priorities right now. Right. Versus, actually, I probably could have used them. I would have actually been open to having a conversation because the service they provide could be useful, but they came to me at a wrong angle. And that goes back to like actually taking the time to talk to the person, taking the time to actually get to know their problem. Right.
Yeah. It's some of these cold email outreaches will resonate with me. Many of them don't. And if they do, it's probably because they were able to overcome my initial resistance. Oh, it's a cold email. I know it's a cold email. You can tell. But if they're able to convey some level of real understanding, like that they do understand what I'm wrestling with, or they do understand my objectives, I'm willing to sometimes invest. In fact, I just did this in the last hour. I got an email about podcasting and helping with podcasting, and I thought, they asked enough questions. So I said I sent him a link and said, hey, I'll talk to you for 15 minutes and see where this goes. And if they're good and if it makes sense, then I may move forward with them. But the challenge is, how do you break through in a way that's real and human and compelling, right? And that's not easy to do.
So let's dive into it, because I think that's helpful, and I think a lot of people are missing the how, right? So let's play a game. So let's say you are a small company, you're just coming up in the world, you have a product that's a tech product you want to sell. Where do people start? Like, how do you actually begin selling, or what are the steps? I guess you don't have to give us the secret sauce is, but like steps.
Yeah, no. Happy to. So the first thing is you really have to try and put yourself into the shoes or into the chair that they're in, and you have to understand things in a way that when you do communicate back to them, that they know that they have a sense that you've done your homework. Number one, that you have a real understanding of what their problems are. And so they're not teaching you how to do their business, or they're not teaching you, they don't have to explain things at a very rudimentary level, that they're coming in, I can get, this person's invested some amount of time in understanding things. So the way to do that, if you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, or you're doing some side gig, is before you do any real selling to people, go out and talk to people in that space in a very curious, unguarded way. Hey, this is what I'm looking to do. This, I'm thinking about building a solution around this. And by the way, this is useful in general because you really want to learn about what it is you're building before you build it. So, and there's no better place to get that information than from people that are suffering from or dealing with the challenges that you're trying to solve. So you go to the people that you think are likely to have that particular problem and say, listen, hey, you know this space, you're dealing with it. I'm thinking about fixing this. Could I ask you a few questions? Could you teach me a little bit? You're an expert. You're living with this every day. Some level of, hey, I want to learn. You're smart about this. Some number of people will respond to that. They're willing to, if you go at it as a curious person, hey, I'm looking to figure this out, and then ask good questions around that, and ask them questions like, hey, what are the problems? How are you dealing with this? What should I be asking you about? And then figuring out what's the value of fixing this. So this is kind of getting to how do you start a company, or how do you go and build your new thing. But if you go in and then learn about it at some level, you have 3 or 4 of those questions, you're going to see a lot of the same. Patterns are going to emerge, and you're going to see the same sorts of problems by and large. And after a while, you're going to have a pretty good knowledge of what it is you're going to try and build. And more importantly, you're going to know what are the things that they're dealing with. And so now when you go to communicate to the next customer, the next prospect, you're going to be able to talk to them in a way. Hey, the reason why I want to talk to you is I'm doing this thing, and I'm building this thing, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And I know what you're running up against, and et cetera, et cetera. And here's why, because I've taught, and so now that person, cold call or whatever, has to stop and think, this person's done their homework. I'm not going to be wasting a lot of time. They probably understand it. Now I'm curious, and I'm willing to invest time. Now, not everyone's going to do that, but one of the things that I think you have to be prepared to do is you have to do some of that work. That makes you, it has a lot of benefits to you. One is it gives you expertise, and it gives you a real understanding of how to communicate to prospective customers. But it also gives you a level of confidence, and that's one of the things I spend a lot of time. Hey, you're good at this. You're an expert. You've done the homework, and so forth. You spend a lot of time understanding the problem. You can articulate the problem. You're speaking it in terms that resonate with your prospective customers. You're talking about the metrics that matter to them. If they're really suffering with this problem, and you come along and say, "Hey, I understand this, and I'm fixing it," they're probably going to want to listen to you. So does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. So essentially, like, you're entering the conversation from like a curious standpoint. And as you're speaking, I'm like, whenever somebody reaches out to me, it's like, hey, Elaine, I'm building something. And I love those kind of emails. Like when people like, I'm building something, I would love your input because you're in this field. Yeah, that's a great way to actually enter the conversation, because I'm curious. I want to add value to you. Like if I can share my expertise of whatever I'm doing, like I'm happy to do that. So it kind of makes you feel good as well as a person. You're like, oh, I can add some value to this person. Like, oh, they're asking me for advice, and like it's a very selfish thing, but it actually does make you feel good, and you want to help, right?
Yeah.
So I like that. Yeah.
You get a chance to contribute to maybe you have a chance to contribute. You have a certain amount of ownership in this product, and then if you're a smart entrepreneur and you're going back at them, you say at some point, hey, this is where it is now. You can further engage them in the development in it and say, hey, this is what I've mocked up based on the conversations we've had. these are the screenshots. And then maybe you come back later and say, hey, I built this. This is the beta. Do you want to try it out? And then at some point, do you want to buy it? And maybe you give them some early adopter pricing or whatever. But that now they're invested, and now maybe you get a reference out of them, a testimonial. Maybe you can figure out the case study. These are all things that come from those initial conversations.
Yeah, I like that actually. I think it's a great way to go about it. So I know, listen, in sales, it's usually a numbers game and also quality, like the quality of the reach outs and stuff like that. Yeah. But also it's a numbers game. So I think that's what a lot of people miss. So is there like a number? Let's say you're starting a company or you're selling a new product, and you need to have weekly kind of metrics of like in your CRM, right? Like the tracking system where like how many people you're reaching out to, how many calls you had, how many deals you closed. So what's that number? Is there a number of reach outs people should aim for every week?
It depends on a number of factors, right? So I'm a B2B guy, right? So everything is, for me, is I think in terms of selling to large businesses. And, if you're a B2C or direct-to-consumer person, it's going to vary because those numbers are huge, or potentially. If you're going after direct-to-consumer or you're B2C, you're looking for typically the purchasers are smaller. You have to make more of them to generate revenue. When you're going to B2B, you could literally have, in some cases, you're a developer, you built this product, and it's, you might be able to sell it to someone for $100,000 or $1 million. And if it solves a big enough problem, you may only need one customer or just a few customers. So the level of investment you make is going to vary by, how much revenue you want to generate and what's the size of the sale and what's the sales cycle like. So with large enterprise sorts of deals, you might invest in only 10 companies but it might require a whole bunch of conversations and a lot of diligence and so forth, and a lot of touches and a lot of customization. And so but in that case, you might only have 10 or 20 customers. I mean, I deal with a lot of hospitals, people that sell to hospitals. There are 5,000-ish hospitals in the country, but then there are only maybe 300 or 400 academic medical centers. So if you're selling to academic medical centers, you only may have a market of 300 or 400 customers. And so it's in those instances, it's really important that you do a very nice job, selling effectively into them, because you don't have that many to go. So, if you go to them and don't do and aren't elegant enough about it, you may have basically wasted a significant percentage of your customer base. If you're going direct as a consumer, it might be hundreds of thousands or millions of people that you're going after. So it really does matter.
It makes sense. Yeah, because B2C is a very expensive game to play in, because it is you have to reach so many people because the tickets are. But then with B2B, you can have huge contracts. I mean, you can have 2-3 companies like enterprises, and exactly. That's your customer. Yeah. Right. So that's helpful. Yeah. So another thing I think people, and by people, I mean myself included, the things that I've kind of learned the hard way is that not everybody wants your product, obviously, but sometimes also people just simply miss the emails. And so follow-up is super important in sales, right? So what is that process like? When do you follow up? How many times do you follow up? How long do you wait between one email and the next one? What's... Well,
is this after you've contacted them, or after have you actually talked to them, or?
Good question. Let's do both. Let's do one. You reached out, they never responded. Do I follow up again? Yeah. And then the second scenario is you reached out, they responded, you had a conversation, and then what do you do after that conversation?
I'm going to be better at answering the second question than the first. Okay. The first question is very email centric, and there are people that are way more knowledgeable about how to do outbound emails and so forth. So there is a certain cadence that needs to happen, and I guess the one thing I will say about this is it depends on the who you're reaching out to. Again, if it's a consumer, you maybe will get away with lots of emails over a short period of time. But in other instances, there are certain people that just get bombarded with emails. One of my ideal customers is an investor, because they aggregate, like a VC, they aggregate the sorts of customers that I would do business with. I work with mostly with health tech companies that are selling to health plans and health systems, and I help them with sales. And so investors, VCs, and private equity people are they get bombarded with this stuff, right, with emails. And so how you go about emailing them and reaching out to them is tough. But if you can get through in some way, then I guess the idea is to try and be as little bit of a bother or nuisance as you can be. Once you've gotten made a contact with someone on that call, and now we're getting into kind of sales strategy or sales process, and that is when you're on that call, you want to figure out two things. And one thing that's kind of important to figure out, or one thing that I have to mention, is I try not to spend all the time thinking about selling. What I'm trying to do in my conversations with prospective customers is I want to figure out if I can be helpful. That's the way I think about it. Can I help them? Is there a fit here? Can I do good work for them? And if I can't, based on the discovery questions that I ask them, I will tell them, I'm not the guy for you. I've done this plenty of times. I can't do this. What you really need is this. And I might point them to somebody else, or I'll tell them how to get started, or I'll tell them where I would go if I were them. So I try and figure out if there's a fit. Now, in the course of the conversation, based on the questions and the answers I get back and so forth, I might determine that there's reason to have a follow-up call, and that there's a fit. I think I can help them, that sort of thing. And what I will try to do is I'll try to figure out when's the next time to have that conversation, rather than wait until after we've hung up the phone. I will want to say, hey, this sounds great. Here's how I can help. Blah blah blah, or whatever. Here's the next step. When can we get back together? I say I can find time tomorrow about this. One of the things I try and do, and I write about this in my book, is what I want to do is compress the sales process as much as is reasonable. So rather than say, let's talk next week, I might say, how soon can we get back on the phone? Or how soon can we, I could do this tomorrow. I could get back on with you tomorrow. I have time tomorrow. And even if they drag it out, or even if they can't meet tomorrow or the next day, what you're doing is you're setting up a level of expectation and delivery that, hey, I'm ready to move. I can move quickly. And a lot of customers are, one of the criteria they're going to measure you on is whether or not you're responsive, and whether or not you're engaged, and how much they can count on you. Because choosing you as a vendor, as a partner, is risky. And if they pick the wrong person, they can waste time, they can look bad, they can lose money, they can not get the problem solved, they can make the problem worse. All those things can happen. And so they're evaluating you throughout this process. And one of the things you can do is to kind of compress that time, and that's valuable. I sort of digressed a little bit there, but
no, this is helpful. All of this is helpful. Yeah, I'm just like thinking about it from like real life, like the things that I experienced, and I'm like, that is so spot on.
Yeah,
that is so spot on. No, that's super helpful. And I again, like I like the availability piece, because again, like, listen, if you're trying to sell me stuff, right? Like if I'm going to be using your product, I want to know that you're not just going to, take your time responding, because it's like, what if, I really want the hand holding, honestly, like as a customer, at least in like at first in the beginning, depending on what you're selling and etc. But yes, like I want to feel like you're a partner in this. I don't want to just be like used and dumped and you just sell me your stuff and then you move on to the next person. No, like I want to feel like you actually care about your product and want to solve my problem. Right. So yes, absolutely. I think that's also a lot of companies, what I see, like, products and services is they miss this. They miss the customer service piece, that partnership piece. Absolutely. Right. It's so important.
Yeah. And it's especially important the longer your sales cycle is, because what they're doing, if it's a long sales cycle, weeks or months, as opposed to like a consumer product, someone says, oh, I like this thing. Oh, this is cool. I want this. And they put their money out and buy it. The decision time is very short. But both with B2B solutions, it could be weeks or months or years, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's hard that level of engagement and commitment and delivery is hard to sustain if it isn't genuine. And I think customers are often looking at us as if we're sales partners or vendors or whatever, that they're looking to see how reliable are they going to be? How much are they going to make me look good? Are they going to deliver the way they're supposed to? Do I have to worry about reviewing the contract from time to time to keep them on track, or am I going to be able to deal with these people basically on a handshake? Those sorts of things come out over time. And so the degree to which you can deliver on that and consistently convey that, I'm someone you can count on, makes a huge difference.
No, absolutely. What's the best sales career advice you've ever gotten?
I don't know if it's the best necessarily, but it's one that I always sort of, it was really kind of important to me early on. And that is, I was selling to Bell Labs, AT&T Bell Labs, a long time ago. And there was a guy there that that was in another company, but we were compatible. He was a hardware vendor, and I sold database software. And I had the good fortune of being able to get to know him and kind of follow him around on some of the sales calls, because my software ran on his machines, and he was selling his machines into Bell Labs. And I learned a bunch of stuff. And I guess the lesson I would take away from that, it sort of just accelerated my success, is that learn from people that are doing it. And that is, who's doing it. This is a good example of that. If you're someone new and you're like a founder and you're just starting out, then this sorts of homework is very useful. And that is, just seeing how other people do things and learn from what's already been done, as opposed to just try everything on your own. The other thing I would say is, at the risk of rambling on here, but the other thing I would say is, you have to do it. And the thing you have to do is kind of throw yourself out there and make a bunch of mistakes and just do it. And then learn from those mistakes. And the thing about it is, everybody wants to look really polished the first time. And I think you have to throw that idea out the window. I think you have to do some preparation, but at the same time, you have to throw yourself out there and ask yourself questions. And as long as you're genuine and curious, and you're going at this with the right intent, hey, listen, I'm out here trying to build this thing, and it's this thing is supposed to solve problems for people, and that sort of, if that's your motivation and that's your mission, then I think you'll get better. But you have to put in the reps. You have to put in the time.
And what's the name of your book?
Salescraft, and it's just a bunch of short chapters about various little techniques and sales practices that I collected over the years, and it's fun bucket list book. I'm doing another book now on how to launch a startup, and from a sales perspective. And some of the stuff that I talked about just now about how to suss out what the functionality should be and how to do it is very kind of sales driven. And so that next book is coming out.
Nice. I'll make sure to include that in the show links, and if you and then I guess maybe just your website so that people keep an eye out for the new book that's coming out.
Yeah.
So that'll be super helpful. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to talk a little bit more? They want to utilize your services.
So connect with me on LinkedIn, Brendan McAdams. I'm pretty good if you DM me or connect with me and then message me. I'm pretty reachable. The website is Kinetics, KIINETICS.com, and you'll have that link in the show notes. And then I'm doing a newsletter. I do a newsletter on sales. Specifically, it's more focused on health tech, but it is very sales focused and a little broader, sometimes getting other topics, but it's mostly sales and startup related stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. Brendan, I learn from you every time I have a conversation with you, online, offline. So thank you so much. Thank you for making the time, and I'll have you back again, because every time I speak with you, you're doing something new within the sales realm, and you bring in new knowledge and new information to myself and of course my audience as well. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I am. I'll be running an accelerator in January. I ran an accelerator a couple of years ago. And I'm the program director for another accelerator here in Baltimore. It's starting in January, and I'm doing some work with Techstars on the health tech side. I'm doing some presentations and mentoring with them. So there's lots of stuff going on.
That's amazing.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.